So there's been some back and forth right now about the Djokovic battle as to whether or not he's actually going to sue him. Right now, the report from the Daily Mail here and other places is just simply that he's looking into suing them. Now, why is he suing them? So this is the importance of the story here, is that Novak Djokovic, who is a world famous, probably the number one tennis player in the whole world, was denied entrance into the Australian Open, which is right now going on. And here's why: because he refused to get vaccinated. He had already had COVID, said that he would not get vaccinated, and therefore Australia would not let him into the country so that he could participate in the Australian Open. And then just the other week, he was deported from Australia, which signaled the end of his fight to actually compete in the Australian Open. And as I suggested at the beginning of the episode, making him a historical figure, the very first ever athlete to be kicked out of competition and disqualified for refusing to take a drug. So Novak Djokovic is not going to compete in the Australian Open, and of course that means that not only did he have to fight an incredible amount of legal battles to get into the country, which he was denied, but also too, he is going to be robbed of a bunch of money from being able to compete and win in the Australian Open that would have come to him if he fared well in the competition. So at the end of the day, there sure seems to be a case that Djokovic has with suing Australia. Now, hopefully by now, we can see past the utter insanity of someone who has natural immunity being refused entrance into a country simply because he will not get a vaccine. Now, there's some crazy stuff going on in Australia, as I'm sure you've seen, and you can see that here. They're incredibly oppressive in terms of lockdown and in terms of vaccines. Now, because we happen to actually still have a constitution in this United States, we've actually avoided some of that stuff, but it hasn't stopped us from giving in to the COVID hysteria that is around this issue. And there's still so many people, because of this surge with Omicron, that is causing people to just absolutely throw their brains in the garbage when it comes to COVID. And there needs to be some accounting for this. And so this is where I want to bring you to what Bill Maher just recently suggested on his show when he delivered a Gallup poll. Now, he's going to kind of illustrate this for you guys, but suffice to say, the Gallup poll shows the incredible diversity of understanding of COVID between independents, Republicans, and Democrats. And you'll see in the Gallup poll that Democrats are the most misinformed people as to certain issues surrounding COVID. Here, I'll let you watch that for yourself.
You know, the high information by the science people? In a recent Gallup survey, Democrats did much worse than Republicans in getting the right answer to the fundamental question, what are the chances that someone who gets COVID will need to be hospitalized? The answer is between 1% and 5%. 41% of Democrats thought it was over 50%. Another 28% put the chances at 20 to 49. So almost 70% of Democrats are wildly off on this key question and also have a greatly exaggerated view of the danger of COVID-2 and the mortality rate among children. All of which explains why today the states with the highest share of schools that are still closed are all blue states. So if the right-wing media bubble has to own things like climate change denial, shouldn't liberal media have to answer for, how did your audience wind up believing such a bunch of crap about COVID?
Right on. The man is hardly any right-leaning pundit. He's a classic liberal, and he's making a valid point here that I think we need to be willing to consider, that we need to be willing to think about. If, Republican, red state, red-dominated ideology created the big lie, which then led to January 6th, and Republicans and people who voted for Donald Trump need to answer for that. And the January 6th, that farce of a committee, deserves to be publicly holding this trial so that we can hold these people to account. Well, who is going to hold the left to account for the incredible amount of misinformation surrounding COVID? Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that any of the 800,000 people in climbing that have died in the United States are anything other than a travesty. Of course, that is only to try to blackmail people, to try to use other people's death, as unfortunate as they are, to try to prove your point, which shame on you for doing it. COVID hysteria has absolutely blinded people to the point where there are people on social media and other places that suggest that if you refuse to vaccinate your kids, well, then your kids should be taken from you. Or, better yet, if you didn't get vaccinated, well, then you deserve to die. Well, shame on you. That is COVID hysteria to the max. Either you're a garbage person and you have garbage morality, or you've given in to the mainstream media's lying take on COVID and you have become utterly misinformed about the dangers of COVID. Right now, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those who are COVID vaccinated, triple vaxxed, and quadruple boosted, and even tramp stamped, that all of that will not protect you from Omicron by and large, except to make what happens less severe. So great, get the vaccine if you want to, but understand this. Vaccinated people are contracting and spreading COVID just as are people who are not vaccinated. And natural immunity still is a thing at the end of the day. And this is the Novak Djokovic thing, is that if you have natural immunity, it is still stronger than the vaccine. And so you say, well, you should double up on it. Get natural immunity and the vaccine. Fine. But let's not pretend that we live in a world where natural immunity isn't stronger than a vaccine. We all know the truth unless you've been blinded by COVID hysteria. So if the first question that you ask when somebody dies from COVID is, were they vaccinated? Heck, if you ask that question at all, shame on you. It was none of your business before COVID. It's none of your business after COVID. And good people, when somebody dies, they don't give in to COVID hysteria. They say, I'm praying for you. What can I do for you? And if you can't muster that, then you are absolutely a victim of the mainstream media's narrative to try to overblow COVID. And this is why you have a group of people, almost 70% of which are utterly misinformed about the dangers and the hospitalization of COVID.
You can catch brand new episodes of Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman every Monday and weekly bonus episodes to keep you thinking throughout the week. But you have to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like this video and share it with friends.